Secret Level is Tim Miller's latest anthology series, but instead of being about love, death, and or robots, instead this is all just a marketing ploy for people to play more video games. So we're going to rank the episodes today from worst to best based on how much I want to play the games that these are based on. Some of these games I've already played before, but I'm still ranking this list like that, making me go, actually, you know what, I kind of want to play this game again. So let's get right into it, starting with Crossfire. This is an old school FPS game. I like the fact that some of the soldiers in this were Australian. As someone who is also from Australia, it's nice to hear an accent that I recognize, especially Claudia Dumit, who's from The Boys, who I didn't realize was Australian until watching this, and I'm like, oh yeah, great. The reason why this episode is at the bottom for me is because for me it's a great representation of the way in which the military FPS market is right now, where everything just kind of looks the same. And I'll be honest, I'm not super invested in this. This list is obviously very subjective, and if you disagree, I'd love to see your list in the comments below and why you actually think the rankings should be different. And while you're there, why don't you subscribe and like, because it's free and it's easy. But back to Crossfire. This episode is very militaristic looking. It has all the trappings of your generic military shooter. There's no reason why anyone would confuse this for being a Call of Duty or a Battlefield or anything like that. I didn't super love the action in this, and I didn't really care about the stakes in the episode, especially coming after some of the other action-heavy episodes from this season. I think Crossfire kind of suffers from looking very similar. Both the good guys and the bad guys, in quotation marks, look very similar, and it's hard to tell what their motivations are. For once, I felt like a boomer watching kids play Battlefront and being like, is this one of the Call of Duties? Up next, with Honor of Kings. What is it with MOBAs and having like incredibly rich lore that has nothing to do with their gameplay? For those of you who haven't played Honor of Kings, it's basically a League of Legends-like, if not very literally a League of Legends-like, in the way that League of Legends spawned from Dota, Honor of Kings spawned from League of Legends. This is to Honor of Kings what Arcane is to League of Legends. And while I've not played Honor of Kings, I'm sure that the gameplay looks nothing like this episode. That was one of the reasons why I didn't really want to play Honor of Kings after watching this. I watched this and went, hey, this is great. I didn't want to play Honor of Kings in the same way that Arcane did not bring me back into League. The AI city aesthetic in this episode is kind of cool, and I do think that the lore behind Honor of Kings is very interesting and does actually showcase a lot of what makes this episode interesting. However, I thought the writing was a little bit on the nose and it tries to get a little bit too metaphorical. The changing landscape is cool in the way in which it kind of goes between the AI and the human, and this kind of intellectual chess match that happens between them is a really cool touch and definitely does add to this very interesting layer of this world. But overall, this one kind of bored me, and all the flashy lights didn't really do enough to get me invested in what was really going on. Up next is New World, Amazon's MMO, which I actually have heard pretty good things about. Immediately, this episode starts off with the Arnold Schwarzenegger character and his minion, and it's a bit uncanny valley. I've never been a really big fan of the Tim Miller CGI aesthetic, and this show definitely showcases the elements of it that I really kind of bounce off of. Watching this episode, it was really quite difficult to grasp because I kept looking at the people going, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, you're trying to be live action, but you're not doing enough to make this look any different. So if anything, it just kind of misses the mark to be ultra realistic. I really like the way this episode incorporates the respawn mechanic though. This will happen a lot in some of these episodes, and while I did think it was good in this specific episode, I think the other episodes that use the respawn mechanic do so a little bit better. I don't know how New World works specifically. I'm sure the MMO part of it is cool, and I do like how they have the story of this king trying time and time again to get good, and I'm not gonna lie, he looks kind of sick in that necrotic armor though. It's very like classic, I want to get this really cool piece of tech, and so I'm gonna grind really hard to get the cool looking armor. Up next is Playtime, and I remember starting this going, oh, this is kind of cool, and then realizing very quickly, oh wow, this one is just an ad for PlayStation. This was one of the things that they showed off in the trailer, all of these recognizable PlayStation characters, and I'm sure a lot of other people were really excited to see how they were going to be incorporated into this episode. The answer is not very much at all. This whole episode relies so heavily on cameos, especially in a Deadpool and Wolverine age where there is no substance to it. It's just, hey, look at this, do you remember this? Hey, look, it's Kratos, you like that guy, right? All show, no suspense, and maybe I'm just getting old, and this isn't enough to sustain my interest anymore, but eventually I kind of went, okay, well, enough Helldivers references aren't enough to make this interesting. Kevin Hart plays the AI, and that definitely didn't get annoying real quick. It's just kind of Free Guy, but PlayStation. Especially after Astrobot won Game of the Year, which is a phenomenal game and does still reference PlayStation material in a way that is nowhere near as on the nose as it is in this episode. I also don't like how much these AIs look like Astrobot. Astrobot is perfect and can do nothing wrong and will never do anything wrong. I don't like how these robots are besmirching Astrobot's name, but You know, it is kind of cool seeing all these things and especially going to the new world and being like, bro, the building looks like a PS5. Up next is the episode based on the Outer Worlds. I've played the Outer Worlds. I really like the Outer Worlds. I think the vibe of this world that they're putting into this story is really interesting. And man, hearing that music stinger is so great. Shout out to Justin Ebel, who composed Outer Worlds. Incredible soundtrack. I like how corporate focused the game is, and I think that this short does do a really great job of highlighting that mega corporate space, how everyone is like on that rat race to become the best, and people are used for corporate gain. They're trying hard to beat the Fallout accusations, but The Outer Worlds was written by Obsidian, and this clearly wasn't written by Obsidian. The writing in this episode is not as strong as I think The Outer Worlds writing is. I think the story goes by a bit too quickly, and Amos's hyper-idealistic positivity doesn't have the same charm of, say, Lucy from the Fallout TV show, but it's good enough, and I think this episode is just good enough. There's a lot of potential there to make it really interesting. All these references to Aunt Cleo. I could have seen a world in which the girl was a plant, and in fact was just designed there to get this kid obsessed with the company that she then ends up becoming. But no, it's very idealistic, and she just becomes Aunt Cleo, and I like how dumb she looks all dressed up like Auntie Cleo, but Auntie Cleo is cool. I would never say anything bad about Auntie Cleo. I love Auntie Cleo. Up next is the Pac-Man one, and some of you might be surprised to see this kind of low on the list. It does come off very funny in this post-hyper-realistic video game world in a way that people poke fun at the fact that all these video game adaptations are hyper-serious. SNL made a whole sketch about how if Mario Kart was serious, and while I'm excited for this to be an actual video game, I wonder if this was a game that already exists, and then they were like, hey, let's just make it Pac-Man. There are some interesting aesthetics to this. I think the roguelike element of respawning and having this faceless creature that you follow is very video gamey. If you showed this to someone in 1980, they'd be as confused as I was. The imagery is really cool, and I do like the references to the Pac-Man aesthetic, but I thought he was going to eat grapes or something, you know? I thought he was going to get a cherry halfway through and it was going to give him 100 points. All of this kind of vague metaphor connection to Pac-Man, I think is a bit of a stretch. But as it stands on its own, I think this is a cool episode, and I'm sure will be a very cool video game as well. Up next is the Mega Man episode, another one where music does a lot of the heavy lifting. Hearing that Mega Man theme is very, very cool. I like how he's called Rock, because, Rockman was his original name in Japan, whatever. That one's for the nerds. It gave me Astro Boy 2009 vibes, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, as someone who watched Astro Boy 2009 at an impressionable age and did kind of enjoy it. But the theme music hits hard, and maybe I've just been pilled with these ultra-realistic AI covers and stuff, but I don't think this was AI animated. But something about the art style really makes it look AI animated. It's got that very sheen of AI stuff. I'm sure everyone has been recommended those videos that's Star Wars if it was ultra realistic, and it's just AI move photos and it's really low effort content. And I do think that a lot of people put a lot of effort into this, and I worry that AI existing now is starting to really lower the standards for animation, which sucks because this show is phenomenally animated. And I'm sure a lot of people put a lot of really hard work to make it so. But now, because the market is so saturated with this type of visual style, seeing the short reminded me of those things, which is not the short's fault. And I think Mega Man does a good job of, pushing past that. But it is quite short, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things that prevent this episode from being higher on this list for me. It's very quick, and it's just Mega Man, you're not ready. Okay, just kidding, you are ready. Teleporting to the top of the building at the end was a really nice touch, and is a great reference to the classic Mega Man beginning. So I do think this show does a lot of good jobs. And I did kind of go, hey, you know what? I do like Mega Man. Maybe I'll go back and play those older games. Up next is Spelunky, another fun look at the roguelike mechanic that uses the respawn idea much more interestingly than, say, New World. I really like the animation style in this, but I wish they went a bit more cartoonish considering how iconic Spelunky's art is. They could have really gone hard into the 2D animation style, but they did kind of stick with that CG. I guess that is Tim Miller's brand. Even though this is an anthology, there is a consistent animation style throughout it. That's what makes it an anthology. But I did really enjoy this episode. I thought the whole idea of learning from your past mistakes and going further and further and understanding that, the journey is what's fun. People don't play Spelunky because they want to get to the end. Obviously, that is the end goal. But there is joy in every single run. And I think Spelunky highlighting that is the reason why people play roguelike games is one of the best parts of this episode. But 82 deaths in Spelunky, you got to pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. 82 deaths, and that's I haven't even finished the first place yet. But I did like how it was kind of a metaphor, because it's whoa, dude, life is like a roguelike. We are rogues. Every day is a new run. You know what I mean? Wait, is her name Anna Spelunky? Up next is Exodus. From the people who brought you Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons comes a brand new sci-fi video game that hasn't even come out yet, but honestly, I'm in. I'm a sucker for anything sci-fi, and I had seen a gameplay trailer for this already, so I was excited to see more, but I didn't like how it started with narration, and then I was like, okay, well maybe it's just the beginning. Maybe this the beginning narrates it, and then they continue to narrate the entire short, and I was like, oh, but like, watching this is so cool. I really don't need a voice to be like, and then for 7 years, this person did this while this person only spent 1 year. Like, I could probably pick that up anyway. I guess it's a bit confusing, but I do like how they use time dilation in this. I'm a sucker for whenever sci-fi plays with time. I think it's a really cool way to tell a really interesting story in a way that like exists outside of the ways in which we confine Earth. One of the best things about sci-fi is that you're able to tell stories that are unreal. And using time dilation is a really easy way to have that fantastical feel without like actually doing anything else. Something as simple as having characters experience time differently is inherently science fiction, and that's really fun. I really like how the design of this show is. I hope that this translates to the game. I really like the ships and the aliens, and like there's a space leopard. I mean, that's awesome. But it's very quick and it's very condensed, and I think it suffers from being a very dense universe and story, and I'm sure that the game is very expansive, but they're trying to condense it all into a very short amount of time. It's like, imagine trying to condense all of Star Wars and New Hope into 15 minutes. That's kind of what this feels like a YouTube recap of Star Wars Episode 4. And I hope this isn't just the story of the game, because I am interested in playing the game, but if this is just the game, I'm going to be like, oh, well, I already know this story. But space looks really cool, and the space exploration part looks really cool, and I doubt ship combat will be this engaging, but I think this was a really good teaser as to what the game could be. I'm interested. I'm cautiously optimistic, but, you know, I'm a sucker for a sci-fi, and I think this one looks pretty fun. Up next is Concord. This is high on the list because, wow, this game looks awesome. I wonder how I can play it. Oh. Ironically, this is one of my favorite episodes, and if they had made a linear single-player story game in this incredibly vibrant and colorful world, I think I would have certainly played the game. Instead, it's this weird hero shooter that I never actually ended up playing because I was like, I really don't need another one of those. There are enough of those on the market right now. I really like the design, I like the colors, I like the style. What the hell, Concord is cool, man! But it's a great reminder of how good style and design is not enough to grab an audience to play a game. These games can't just rely on cool designs and interesting characters to be interesting, because if the gameplay is boring, people won't play it. However, it is enough to make a cool episode of TV. It does last a little bit too long though, and although it is fun, I don't really know or care enough about these characters to hear their snarky comebacks when they've been betrayed. It does kind of have an MCU vibe where it becomes kind of try-hard Guardians of the Galaxy, but that opening sequence where they're trying to break out of the facility is really well directed, and I think it's very fun. They also get bonus points for their visual like depiction of light speed, which I thought looks really awesome, and I'm sure does not ever appear in the game. So I don't know what will happen to Concord. I'm sure nothing, unfortunately, but this could have been a really interesting look as to what Concord's potential could be if it actually was successful. Up next is Dungeons & Dragons, the premiere of this season as well, and I think it does benefit a lot from being the first one. The animation is phenomenal. What an incredible opening. And honestly, every Dungeons & Dragons player loves watching any Dungeons & Dragons content the right way, which is to call out the name of all of the spells whenever they're being cast in the show. It happened with Honor Among Thieves, and I did it the same with this. The depiction of Wild Shape is really, really awesome, but I didn't really love the handheldy shaky cam aesthetic of this. I get that they're trying to make it look ultra realistic, but I always take issue with animated television when they try to like mimic real life filmmaking. Like, that's not the point. Why would you like lower your standards to conform to the standards of traditional filmmaking when you can elevate it and do stuff that a normal camera couldn't do, like be stable? This episode is quick, it's simple. I think the way in which it tells the story is very interesting, and I think the storytelling within these characters is very cool. Immediately you understand the dynamics of the group, and I do like how there's some kind of infighting between the party where like some people's ideals don't really match, which makes for much more interesting storytelling. The reveal of the dragon and Tiamat showing up is this really awesome spectacle that shows up, and it does set a really good standard for the rest of Secret Level, especially since it is the first level. Up next is the Armored Core episode, and it is breathtaking. And no, that's not just because of Keanu Reeves. I do like how they open it with the pilot, and you show him kind of going through his lifestyle as a machine, and then he gets into the actual machine, and this whole idea of every mech show is about what it means to be human somehow, and Armored Core, of course, is no different. The mech combat in this episode is phenomenal, and is so good that it made me go, man, I really should play Armored Core. Am I going to? Absolutely not. I'm not a Souls fan, and I think Armored Core is probably in that vein of third-person action game that really doesn't appeal to me, but the mech combat is awesome. I could use less of the back and forth between Keanu and the voice, but it's a fine way of telling the audience what's going on. I think in comparison to the Warhammer episode, which we will get to, this episode does a lot more of telling you what is happening in the battlefield rather than just showing you what is happening in the battlefield, showing the people coming back and forth, showing how Keanu Reeves responds. I think we could have picked that up without the dialogue between him and his AI. I do wish they'd show more than tell, but that being said, what they're showing is fun, and you can kind of tune out the actual dialogue and pay attention to the fighting, which is very, very cool. Up next is the Sifu episode. I really like how the animation style looks pretty similar to the game itself. This is the first episode that showcases the respawn mechanic chronologically, and I think the way in which Sifu actually shows the respawning mechanic, I think is the best of the show. It really makes the episode feel extra video gamey and has a visual example of what respawning looks like. Aging with each attempt, coming back time and time again. That's what makes the Sifu game, and in this case, it's what also makes the show. It's action heavy, you know what's going on, you understand the dynamics, you know who the big bad is, you can see the grind from the early bosses who aren't seen to the eventual big boss. This is the most video game one, and as a result, it made me want to play the video game so much more. The best episodes of Secret Level is where story is not the focus, but the through line, the thing that is the foundation of the episode, and instead what happens is the action builds upon it, just like every good video game is. At the end of the day, people don't play video games because they want to see a good story. Seeing a good story is supplementary. The actual act of gameplay is why people play games. There are games with great stories and pretty mediocre gameplay, but all of the best episodes of Secret Level are ones that blend the two together, have interesting stories and phenomenal action, and Sifu is one of the shining examples of that. Up next, of course, is Unreal Tournament, and I watched it going, is this not just the story of Andor? But it's cool because they're robots. I do like how with the robot that we have the focus on, like the main robot, he has a kind of slight visual difference, so we're still able to differentiate that robot from like the rest of them. The robot in Secret Level Unreal Tournament episode has like the chip on his head, so you know which one is the main one, even when they switch. It's so cool seeing arena combat on screen. I don't know why, like, it's one of those things that people don't really do a lot of, and then you see it and you're like, this is awesome. Like, it's like watching a game of Halo or like a game of any arena combat shooter, and it immediately made me want to go and play one. It made me go, why haven't they remade Unreal Tournament? I want to play this game right now. I do like how they have an announcer in world because it's all part of like the show, right? And they have someone like yelling double kill, ultra kill. The people get yelled at, there's a captain, we don't have time for camping. And I was like, I know that one. I think this is a great way of referencing arena combat while it actually still being integral to the show. I feel like we haven't seen this kind of action on screen since like Tron Legacy, and Tron Legacy also does it really well. Man, Unreal Tournament looks fun. Like, I understand that this whole show was marketing, but the fact that they didn't have a new announcement for a new Unreal Tournament is probably a lost opportunity. But they're making enough money on Fortnite, they don't need to make another one of those anyway. And finally, surprising no one, the best episode of Secret Level by far is the Warhammer 40k episode. I mean, the music, the imagery, Titus, the scale and brutality of these Space Marines are phenomenal. Obviously, I have some connection to Warhammer, so I understood the lore. And if you haven't seen Warhammer before and you watch this episode, let me know what you thought, because I'd be very interested to see like how someone who has basically no knowledge of this show or this world at all understood what was going on, because as someone who understands the power of the Space Marines and understands the weakness of the Chaos Bikers, for example, but understands the power of the Chaos Gods, it was easy to see how that power dynamic involved. However, I do think the show does a very good job of showcasing that even if you didn't know. As soon as the 4 Blade Guard veterans land, they are not touched once, and they mow through this huge horde of enemies until they get to the Chaos Guard, and then Tzeentch's sorcerer comes in without their protection and destroys them one by one, showing the Achilles heel of the Imperium of Man. These Space Marines are strong and are built for warfare, but when it comes to the mind, they are weak without protection. I always like the lack of dialogue, the fact that most of this episode was showing you and not telling you anything at all, walking in and showing their purity seals burning, showing that they're going into scary territory. The Tzeentch god, they can't even touch my boy Titus because he is a boy who has known no fear. A lot of war media nowadays tries to go into the conflict of the soldier, people who are facing the war and are traumatized by it or don't really know why or what they're doing. But that's not this. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and these 4 Space Marines only know war. These guys don't care. They don't learn from their lessons. They aren't traumatized by the brutality of war. They are the brutality of war. They are the fist. They can look at each other and see the strength in their numbers, and all they know is to kill. They've been doing it for centuries. Their whole thing is to destroy and win. That's all the Space Marines are, and I think that Warhammer doing that in a way that showcases that specifically without having to give them actual depth or conflict is what makes the Warhammer universe so interesting. And that's my list. Hopefully you liked it, and if you didn't like it, tell me why, and tell me what your list was. And if you can't be bothered writing a whole list, just tell me which episode was your favorite. Was it like me? Was it the Warhammer episode? Or was there another episode that jumped out to you? Let me know in the comments below, and check out my other videos if you're looking for more analysis like this.